Next up, we're going to have Gary Palmer come and give some remarks. It's a great privilege to be able to introduce Gary to you all. Gary, since coming to Congress, has been just a tremendous asset for the Heritage Foundation and the conservative movement. A real friend who has been there for us in many different fights. I learned something about Gary when I was looking at his bio. I had no idea you walked on to Bear Bryant's football team. That is pretty awesome. Good for you. Before coming to Congress, Gary was the leader of a think tank in Alabama. So he is a conservative policy wonk. He's kind of a heritage type through and through. And then, as I said, since coming to Congress, he has joined lots of different groups on the Hill. He's become a member of the House Freedom Caucus. He's worked with a lot of our most conservative members, but has a kind of ability about him that I've noticed to not just work with the most conservative members in Congress, but to really kind of pull a lot of folks in his direction. It's his demeanor, it's his way. People like that he knows his policy. People like that he has a passion for what he does. So I am excited to introduce to you Gary Palmer. Please welcome him to the stage.
And because they're about to call votes, I will be brief. So I do want to say something about Brooke Rollins. I adore this woman. She's brilliant. I just told Senator Lee she's a rock star. I've worked with her for years through the think tank movement. And I try to remind our colleagues of the potential of the think tank movement and how they've shaped public policy. Not only at the state level, but at the federal level. There are now 65 state-based think tanks, combined budgets over $185 million. And I think with this new administration, there's a lot of optimism for what we can get done. Chairman Smith mentioned Gina McCarthy's emails. We had a hearing on that, and she said that out of 6,000, only one of them was work-related. And my question was, well, when did you work? I mean, I had teenage daughters that didn't text that much. But I want to make a couple of points about where I think we've really got some opportunities with this new administration, and particularly with Scott Pruitt as the nominee for the EPA. A lot of people, New York Times headlines, a denialist, they used to get after President Bush for making up words like strategery, but I don't think denialist is not a word either. But it's really not about the science. I mean, if you in terms of the policy, we should pursue the science, okay? But from where we sit, it's really about the process, the constitutional process. I've told people that I think it's legitimate for Congress to debate climate change and things like that, but we've got to follow the science. But more fundamentally, we've got to follow the Constitution. And that's really what's happened up here is that, particularly in the last 8 years, and really preceding that to a much more limited degree, we're losing constitutional government. And I introduced a bill, H.R. 3880, Stopping EPA Overreach Act, and that bill says that Congress never gave EPA the authority to regulate greenhouse gases. And I love quoting liberals to liberals, but John Dingell, who was the longest serving member of the House, I believe, in history, Tim, I think he got elected right after I was born, and he retired in 2014. But he was a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee when the Supreme Court said that the EPA had the authority, and the decision was basically based on the ambiguity of the Clean Air Act. And John Dingell, a liberal Democrat from Michigan, said in an Energy and Commerce Committee hearing that he and other members of that committee were there when the Clean Air Act was written, and that it was never the intention of Congress to give EPA that authority. He said, in fact, it never occurred to us that we needed to inform the Supreme Court of that fact because we thought even they weren't so stupid they wouldn't know that. So that's one of my favorite liberal quotes. The point is, and the point of the bill is, it's not about the issue of climate change or greenhouse gases. The issue is who makes law. Jonathan Turley, liberal law professor at George Washington University, voted for Obama both times, testified before the House Judiciary Committee, and made this point. He said, unless Congress uses its authority to rein in this administration, the administration he voted for, we're in danger of losing the Constitution. So what we have when we talk about the issue of climate change and the EPA is two discussions here. One's a policy discussion. It's a science discussion, and we should pursue the science. I think Chairman Smith mentioned the fact that we had subpoenaed records from the EPA, because we want to look at the scientific data that they're using to justify the policies that they're trying to impose on the people, and they refuse to provide those documents. That makes the science suspect. I'm not saying it makes the scientist suspect. I'm saying it makes the data, the science, suspect. And when you have a situation like that, and the EPA then is making law, for all intents and purposes, that's what they're doing, Senator Lee, is making law. They're bypassing Congress. It really becomes problematic. So I think what we want to do in Congress is, first of all, make sure that we're evaluating all of the science, and then we've got to regain our lawmaking authority. And that's why I introduced 3880. There's another issue that seems unrelated, but it is totally connected, is the Agency Accountability Act. And Senator Lee, I think you're on board with that in the Senate, but it will require that all unappropriated funds go directly to the Treasury identified with the agency where they originated, subject to being appropriated by Congress. Why is that important? It's important because agencies are collecting fines and fees and court settlements, and they're dispersing money without the oversight of Congress. Consequently, when we tell an agency they can't do something like we did with the Department of Homeland Security when the President issued his executive amnesty order, and we said we're not going to fund that, well, DHS came back and said, well, we'll pay for it with fees. And last year, I think the Office Management Budget reported that we collected somewhere over $520 billion in fees. We have identified $83 billion in fines over the last 5 years, and we don't know how much has been awarded through court awards. For instance, the EPA got a judgment against Volkswagen, $100-something million, and directed that Volkswagen make contributions to what, 4 of their favorite left-wing charities? Yep. All of that money should have gone to Congress. I carry my little Constitution in case you really ought to on the floor of the House. But Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7 says no money shall be drawn from the Treasury but in consequence of appropriations made by law. Well, if you got agencies spending money that Congress didn't appropriate, I think that's outside their constitutional authority. But it goes on to say, and a regular statement and account of the receipts and expenditures of all public money shall be published from time to time. I know this is shocking, but federal agencies have been acting unconstitutionally. Okay? I think we've got to restore constitutional authority. That's the most important thing that's going to come out of this administration. It is the single most important thing that we'll do in regard to issues like climate change or anything else is we've got to have the sound science, but we have got to restore constitutional government. We cannot allow agencies to make law, circumvent Congress, bypass Congress, and basically turn us into a bunch of elected bystanders. And I'm very optimistic that we're going to be able to do that. And I'm tremendously excited about Scott Pruitt. I had a meeting with Scott in Denver actually before I got elected. I'd won the runoff to talk about how the attorneys general can work with Congress to restore constitutional authority. I think Scott was one of the attorneys general who filed suit against the EPA, claiming that they were in violation of the Clean Air Act, acting outside their legislative authority. So going forward, I think that's what we've got to look forward from this administration. And having a guy like General Pruitt as the administrator of the EPA, I'm quite certain that he will not be sending out 6,000 texts, so we won't have that issue. I think when we ask for documents to back up the positions the EPA takes, that we'll get them. But I also know this, if we're able to pass this Agency Accountability Act and we have the power of the purse again, we can hold agencies accountable. And we'll be able to restore the authority of Congress and make law appropriately. Tim, I really appreciate the opportunity to come speak. I think I'm going to have to head over to the Capitol and vote in a few minutes. And I see my colleague, Pete Olson from Texas. I know my dad was born in Texas, but how did I get invited? Thank you. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Gary.